The sun rose over the horizon like it did every morning, indifferent and merciless. In the middle of a dry, endless desert, a small, crumbling shelter stood. Its walls made of cracked mud and stone, its roof patched with layers of fabric and hope. Inside, the air was still, heavy with silence and thirst. This was where Olivia lived. She was 18 years old, born into this wasteland, where each sunrise wasn't beginning but a challenge. Her family, her mother, father, and little brother, shared this space with her. There was little laughter, even less comfort. Every day revolved around a single, brutal truth: survival. And survival in the desert meant one thing above all else: water. Water was life. Water was currency. Water was everything. And they were running out. That morning, Olivia had woken to the sound of her mother coughing, a dry, scraping sound that echoed through the thin walls. Her little brother lay curled beneath a threadbare blanket, lips chapped and breathing shallow. Her father sat in the corner with a hollow gaze, staring at the nearly empty clay jar that once held their water supply. Only a few sips remained. Not enough for 4 people. Not enough for one. Olivia stood silently, her heart pounding in the dry stillness. No one needed to say it out loud. They were at the edge. She stepped outside, the morning wind stinging her face with grains of sand. The sun was already climbing, and the sky stretched in all directions like an ocean of fire. There were no roads, no signs, no paths, just sand, dunes, rocks, and endless uncertainty. But she knew what she had to do. "I'm going," she said quietly to her father, who had followed her to the doorway. "I'll find water. I don't know how far I'll have to go, but I'll bring it back." Her father's eyes glistened, but he said nothing. Her mother tried to rise to speak, but her legs failed her. Olivia leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. Her brother didn't wake, only stirred in his sleep with a faint whimper. She took one of the clay bowls, light, small, easy to carry, and wrapped it in cloth, tying to a strap over her shoulder. It was barely big enough to hold a liter, but it was all she could carry. She slipped a knife into her belt, not for fighting but for survival, and took one last look at her home. "Wait for me," she whispered, and then she walked away. The desert swallowed her whole. For hours she walked under the sun's harsh gaze, her feet crunching over gravel and sand. The land was vast and quiet, but her mind was louder than ever. Each step reminded her of what was at stake. She couldn't come back empty-handed. Her family didn't have another day, maybe not even another night. She looked at the horizon, where heat waves danced and blurred the earth like a mirage. Her lips were already dry, her skin already reddening under the unforgiving sky. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. There was no map, no direction, only instinct, memory, and desperation. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became unbearable. Olivia wrapped her headscarf tighter, shielding herself as best she could. She passed cacti, dry bushes, and the bones of animals that hadn't made it. Each one reminded her of what failure meant. Still, she kept walking. By midday, her legs ached, her vision began to blur, and doubt crept in like a shadow. What if there was no water? What if she walked for days and found nothing? What if by the time she returned, if she even could, her family would already be gone? She shook her head violently. No, she couldn't allow those thoughts. She had to believe, even when the belief had no reason, even when it hurt. Hours passed. The sun moved westward, casting long shadows behind her. Her body cried for rest, but the idea of returning empty-handed was more painful than the burning in her lungs or the sting in her feet. She climbed to the top of a ridge, hoping to see something, anything. On the other side, a stream, a well, a glimmer of light. But there was nothing, just more sand. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Even tears were water, and she couldn't afford to waste any. She descended the hill slowly, her steps shaky. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped rapidly. The desert was cruel in every way, burning by day, freezing by night. She wrapped herself in the loose cloth she had brought and found shelter behind a rock outcrop. As she sat there, staring up at the stars, doubt returned with greater force. What was she doing? She wasn't a guide. She wasn't a hero. She was just a desperate girl, walking blindly in a dying land, hoping for a miracle, and yet something deep inside her refused to give up. She clasped her hands together. She didn't know how to pray properly. She had seen her mother do it once or twice when things were especially hard. Olivia had always watched from a distance, unsure if anyone was really listening. But now, under the vast sky, she tried. "Please," she whispered, "if you're out there, if you can hear me, help me find water. Help me get back. Don't let them die. Not like this. Not while I'm still trying." The stars said nothing, but Olivia felt a strange stillness settle around her. She laid down, closed her eyes, and let sleep take her. Tomorrow, she would walk again. She had no other choice. Olivia stirred beneath the thin layer of cloth she had wrapped around herself the night before. The cold had been unbearable, gnawing at her bones even more cruelly than the sun had scorched her the day prior. Her body ached from the hard ground and unrelenting wind, and her lips had cracked in the dry air. But she was still alive, and that was enough reason to keep going. The sun was just beginning to rise again, bleeding across the horizon in shades of orange and red. It lit the dunes with quiet fire, making the desert seem beautiful, if only for a moment. But Olivia had no time for beauty. She had a family to save. She stood slowly, brushing sand from her clothes, and picked up the small bowl she had brought. It was still empty, still light, too light. She tightened the cloth strap around her shoulder and set her gaze forward. There was no map, no signs, no promise that water was anywhere in the miles ahead. But going back now, without anything to show for it, that was not an option. As she walked, her legs complained and her back protested. But she ignored the pain. The only sound was the shifting of sand beneath her feet and the soft whisper of the wind brushing across the dunes. Her mind wandered through memories of home. Her brother's laughter before the dryness stole it, her father's quiet strength, her mother's soft singing at night. Every memory reminded her of why she could not fail. Mid-morning came and passed, and the sun climbed higher. Sweat began to trickle down her back, only to vanish almost instantly in the dry air. Her mouth felt like it was filled with cotton, her tongue heavy and slow. The sun above was no longer just light. It was punishment, searing her skin, boiling her thoughts. She found herself hallucinating, seeing shapes in the distance that looked like trees, like water, like people. She blinked and rubbed her eyes, only for them to vanish. The desert was a cruel trickster. At one point, she stumbled upon a patch of cracked earth that seemed different. It looked as if there had once been moisture there, like the land remembered rain. Her heart leapt. She knelt down, brushing the surface with her fingers, hoping to feel dampness. But it was dry, bone dry. Her hope withered a little more. By midday, she was crawling up the side of a small hill. Her legs trembled with each step. Her breaths came in short, shallow gasps. She paused at the top and surveyed the land. Still nothing. No oasis. No tracks. Just endless beige. A scream of frustration built in her chest. But she swallowed it. Even that would waste precious water. She kept moving. In the late afternoon, Olivia felt her strength begin to drain completely. She walked slower now, each step more labored than the last. The desert stretched on, cruel and silent. She looked at the sky, blinking through the haze. How much farther? She whispered to no one. Still, there was only wind in response. By sunset, she knew she had wandered far, farther than she could return without help. Her hands shook from dehydration, and the pain in her stomach had sharpened into a constant gnawing ache. She could no longer recall when she had last eaten, but hunger had faded to the background. Thirst ruled her now. She fell to her knees on the sand, the bowl clinking beside her. Her eyes scanned the land with desperation. Nothing. No birds. No plants. No signs of life. It was like the world had forgotten this place. And then something in her cracked. A deep, unbearable ache rose from within. Not physical, emotional. The realization that she might truly die here. That she had left her family with hope and might never return. That she would be another body lost to the desert, never found. Tears stung her eyes. She clenched her fists and looked up at the sky, the vast, endless sky where the stars were just beginning to appear. And for the second time, she prayed. But this time, it wasn't gentle or quiet. It was raw. "Where are you?" she screamed. "I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can. Why won't you help me? I don't have anything left." The desert swallowed her voice. She sank forward onto the ground, pressing her forehead into the sand. The heat still radiated from it, but it gave her no comfort. Her body trembled from exhaustion, from grief, from the cruel silence that seemed to stretch on forever. "I don't want to die," she whispered. "Not like this. Not out here. Not without seeing them again." There was no answer. She lay there for what felt like hours. Maybe it was minutes. Maybe seconds. Time lost all meaning. Finally, when her breath slowed and the trembling stopped, she rolled onto her back and looked at the stars above. They blinked down at her, distant and cold. Her mind drifted into hazy corners. She thought she saw movement beyond the dunes, a figure, a shadow, but when she blinked again, it was gone. Darkness began to pull her in. Her final thought before slipping into unconsciousness was simple. "If you're out there, please don't let it end like this." Olivia didn't dream. There were no visions, no comforting images of home or peace. Only blackness, heavy and unyielding. A silence, so complete it felt like the entire world had vanished. She floated in that nothingness, untethered from time, from pain, from even the thought of thirst. And then, faintly, a sound. It wasn't a voice or a word, just a sensation, a shift, like the stillness itself had been interrupted by something divine. Her eyes fluttered open. The sky above her was a deep, inky violet, scattered with stars that shimmered like distant candles. Her body felt like stone, numb and heavy. Her lips were cracked worse than before, her throat raw and burning. For a few long moments, she lay there motionless, unsure if she was awake or dreaming. But then she felt it, a presence, not physical, not threatening, just there. She slowly turned her head, blinking through the blur, and standing just a few feet away from her, bathed in a light that had no source, was a man. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, radiant yet gentle, his white robes billowing slightly despite the still air. His eyes weren't piercing or distant. They were full of something Olivia hadn't felt in days. Compassion. She blinked again, trying to process what she was seeing. Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. The man stepped closer. His face was kind, weathered with grace, but timeless. He crouched beside her and offered no explanation. He simply extended his hand and pointed toward the horizon, toward a direction she hadn't explored. "There," he said softly. His voice echoed not just in her ears, but deep within her chest. It was warm and strong and undeniably real. Olivia's eyes welled with tears, not from pain this time, but from something she couldn't explain, a feeling of being seen, of being found. "Is there water?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded. Her heart skipped. She tried to sit up, but her arms gave out. The man didn't move to help her. He simply watched with calm patience. Somehow, that gave her strength. She pushed herself up, slowly and shakily, and looked once more in the direction he had pointed. When she turned back to him, he was gone. No footprints, no light, no sound, just the wind. She stared at the space where he had stood, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Logic told her it was a dream, a hallucination, but her heart knew better. That man had been real. She didn't know how she knew it, but she did. And so, with no other choice and a renewed sense of purpose pulsing faintly within her, Olivia picked up her small bowl and began walking. The direction wasn't marked. There was no path, but she moved forward one slow step at a time, following nothing but the echo of his voice and the memory of his eyes. The night air was cool, a blessing after the searing heat of the day. She kept her eyes on the horizon, watching for any signs, any shimmer, any glint of moonlight on water. Minutes passed, then hours. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind was on fire. Something was ahead. She could feel it. And then Just as dawn began to color the sky a pale orange, she saw it, a depression in the earth. She rushed forward, stumbling over rocks and loose sand, nearly falling as her legs gave out beneath her. But she crawled the last few feet, dragging herself forward until she reached the edge. And there it was, water. It wasn't a river or a grand spring. It was a small, shallow pool nestled between stones, glistening in the morning light, like a gift from heaven. The surface was still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward, cupped her hands, and scooped the water into her mouth. Cold, pure, real, she cried as she drank. She drank until her belly ached and her hands trembled. She splashed water on her face, letting it run down her cheeks and neck, rinsing away layers of sweat, dust, and despair. Then she laughed, a full, raw, unfiltered laugh. It echoed across the empty dunes like a bell ringing in a forgotten church. Joy bloomed in her chest, overwhelming and bright. She had found it. She had done it. She had not been abandoned. As the sun rose fully above the desert, Olivia sat beside the water, eyes closed, whispering a quiet thank you into the wind. But after a few minutes, the joy gave way to reality. Her family, they were still waiting, still suffering, still without water. She couldn't celebrate here. Not yet. With trembling fingers, she took the small bowl from her shoulder and carefully filled it. The water was so clear it looked invisible, like liquid light. She tied the cloth tight around it and made sure not a drop could escape. Then she stood and looked behind her. The desert stretched endlessly. She didn't remember how far she had come. She didn't know if she could retrace her steps. But it didn't matter. She would find the way. She had to. The bowl of water felt heavier than its weight should have allowed. Olivia knew it wasn't the clay or the liquid inside that strained her shoulders. It was what the water represented. Salvation, proof, a miracle, a second chance. And now she had to carry it all the way back. The desert did not welcome her return. As she took her first steps away from the pool, the wind shifted, swirling sand across her path as if trying to confuse her. The trail she had carved with her feet had already vanished. There was no path to follow, no sundial or compass, just her memory, her instincts, and the relentless will not to fail. She had no idea how far she had wandered. Everything in the desert looked the same. Dunes rolled into one another like ocean waves frozen in time, and the sky offered no clues. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, not when she had come so far. Her body, though renewed by the water she had drunk, was still aching from days without food. Her stomach was an empty drum, echoing with every step. The muscles of her legs burned with each hill she climbed, and her throat began to dry again under the heat of the rising sun. Still, she pressed on. Each time the wind blew, she gripped the cloth strap holding the bowl tighter, protecting it like a sacred object. She couldn't spill even a drop. This water wasn't just for her, it was for her family, her mother, her father, her little brother. They were waiting, clinging to whatever life they had left. She imagined her mother's tired eyes lighting up when she returned, her father's silent pride, her brother's laughter echoing through the dry air again. That image alone became her fuel. But as the hours passed, Olivia realized something chilling. She didn't recognize anything. Not a single rock formation, not a single hill, not a single shadow. The entire landscape felt alien. Had she walked in circles? Taken a wrong turn in the night? Had the vision of that man, that presence, led her away from home rather than toward it? Panic began to claw at the edges of her thoughts. She stopped walking and turned in every direction, scanning the horizon for something familiar. Anything. But the desert gave her nothing. Her heartbeat quickened. She closed her eyes, steadying herself. "No," she whispered. "I'll find it. I have to." With renewed focus, she chose a direction and started walking again, step by step, one foot after the other. Not fast. She couldn't risk falling or spilling the water, but steady. The sun reached its peak. The sky above her was like molten glass, offering no shade, no mercy. Her shadow clung close to her feet, distorted and wavering. The sweat on her body evaporated as soon as it appeared. She felt the dryness returning, not just in her throat, but in her very bones. She looked up and whispered, "Please, help me find them." But there was no voice this time, no radiant figure, no direction, only silence. By late afternoon, Olivia's pace had slowed considerably. Her legs were stiff, her feet blistered. She had wrapped rags around them. But the sand still found its way in, grinding against her skin like tiny shards of glass. The weight of the water began to feel like a burden too great. She shifted it from one shoulder to the other, then back again, but there was no relief. The thought of dropping it, of drinking just a little to ease the pain, crossed her mind more than once. But she resisted. She would not fail them now. She crested another hill and froze. Far in the distance, nearly hidden by the haze of heat, something caught her eye, a jagged outline against the horizon. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't a rock. It was vertical, angular. Her heart leapt. It looked like the edge of a wall, a corner of her home. She squinted through the shimmer and dropped to her knees, her legs unable to hold her. It had to be. It had to be. Tears flooded her eyes, but she forced them back. Not now. Not yet. She stood slowly, gripping the bowl like her life depended on it, because it did, and began walking faster. Her steps were uneven, more of a stagger than a stride. But she didn't care. Every minute brought the shape into clearer focus. It was her home, the place she had left days ago. Still standing, she broke into a run, or as close to a run as her broken body would allow. Her breath came in heaves. The bowl slapped against her side. Her vision blurred, but she didn't stop. She reached the edge of the home and collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. "I'm here," she sobbed. "I made it back." She pushed open the crooked door and stumbled inside. Silence. The room was dim, the air stale. She looked around frantically. "Mom!" Her voice cracked. "Dad? I'm back. I found water." No answer. She stepped deeper inside, the bowl still in her arms, her heart pounding now with a different kind of fear. She turned toward the corner where her mother always sat, her father's spot, her brother's blanket, and she stopped, her mouth open, but no sound came out. They were there, still, silent. Their bodies lay exactly where she had left them, but now they did not move. They did not breathe. They did not open their eyes. They were gone. Olivia dropped the bowl. It hit the ground with a hollow thud, rolling slightly before coming to rest against the wall. The water inside didn't spill, not yet, as if even it was holding its breath. She stood frozen. Her mother's eyes were closed. Her father's chest no longer rose and fell. Her little brother's small body lay curled under his blanket, unnaturally still. She waited for someone to move, waited for a groan, a blink, a shift of breath. But nothing came. The silence was deafening. "No," she whispered. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, her hands clawing toward her mother. "Wake up. Please, please wake up," she begged, shaking her gently. "I brought water. I did it. I found it. You just have to drink." Still nothing. The bowl lay within arm's reach, and with trembling fingers, Olivia dipped her hand inside and brought the water to her mother's lips. "Here, just taste it, please." But her mother's head lolled to the side. Olivia let out a sound, part scream, part sob, and turned to her father, then to her brother. She tried each of them. She pressed water to their lips, cradled their faces, whispered prayers between shaking gasps. But death had already claimed them. She fell backward against the wall and stared at the ceiling, her chest heaving in silent agony. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, began to flood with tears that burned hotter than the sun ever could. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She had made it. She had done the impossible. She had survived the desert, trusted the vision, found the water, brought it back. And yet she was too late. The sun outside faded as the day slipped into dusk. Shadows lengthened across the room as Olivia sat motionless, her hands limp in her lap, her spirit shattered. Hours passed. Her tears eventually dried, but the emptiness remained. Not just inside the house, but inside her. A vast, echoing void where purpose had once lived. She rose slowly and stumbled outside. The sky above was painted in deep reds and purples, the last light of day kissing the tops of the dunes. The desert, once threatening and endless, now felt like a tomb. She walked out a few steps and collapsed to her knees. There was no one left to save, no reason to try anymore. She looked at the sky and screamed, not with words this time, but with grief so raw it broke the air. Her voice tore through the silence like a knife. She screamed until her throat bled and her body folded inward. Then she whispered the only thing that remained. Why? The word hung there, suspended in the air. And then once again, she felt it. A stillness that wasn't just silence. A calm that wrapped around her like a hand over her shoulders. She opened her eyes slowly, and he was there, standing in front of her, not radiant this time, not shining, just present, just real. His face was gentle, his eyes holding a sadness that mirrored hers. He didn't speak right away. He simply knelt beside her and looked into her soul. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her voice cracked as she asked, "Why didn't you stop it? Why show me the way to water if they were going to die anyway? Why let me hope?" Tears streamed down her face again, fresh and stinging. Why save me and not them? Jesus reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "I did not abandon you," he said softly, "not for a single step." "But they're gone," Olivia sobbed. "I came back too late." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with compassion. "Yes, you came back to loss, but not to nothing." She shook her head. "I don't understand." He looked past her toward the house. Their time had come. It was written, just as it was written that you would go, that you would walk through fire and silence and despair and live. She looked down, her hands clenched in the sand. "You were not just sent to bring water," he said. "You were sent to become someone who could carry it." Her breath caught. He continued. "Their journey ended, but yours begins now." "But I don't want to go on," she whispered. "Not without them." Jesus reached toward her and placed a hand over her heart. "They are not lost. They are with me, and I am with you." His voice was like a river, flowing over her wounds, soothing and unshakable. Olivia closed her eyes. The pain didn't vanish. But something else entered. Something warm. Something real. Peace. A deep, aching, holy peace. When she opened her eyes again, he was gone. No wind. No thunder. Just stillness. But something inside her had changed. She stood slowly and turned toward the house. The bowl of water still sat by the door. She picked it up, hand steady now, and walked back inside. She sat with them one last time, her family, and whispered goodbye, and then she rose. The desert outside waited, and so did the world. The morning came without fanfare. The sun rose steadily above the horizon, casting pale golden light over the desert, warming the sands that still held the memories of Olivia's footsteps. The silence in her home remained, yet was no longer as heavy as it had been the night before. It no longer pressed against her chest like a weight too great to carry. Instead, it had become something else, a space for breathing, a space for remembering. She had sat with her family for hours, brushing her brother's hair gently with her fingers, whispering old lullabies into the stillness, telling them everything she hadn't said before, not because they would hear it, but because she needed to release the love before it suffocated her. Now, as the sun bathed the sky in amber, she wrapped each of them carefully in what little cloth they had left, not in fear, not in denial, but in honor. She whispered over them one last time and walked out the door barefoot, the dry earth greeting her soles like an old friend. The bowl of water was tied once again to her side, no longer a burden, but a symbol. She stood outside her home and looked around, and for the first time, the desert didn't seem endless. It seemed vast, yes, but not empty. Olivia didn't know where she would go. There was no village waiting, no map in her hand. But something deep inside her, a quiet knowing, told her that her steps had meaning now, even if she didn't understand them yet. She walked for hours. The heat returned, unforgiving, but she no longer feared it. Her eyes remained steady on the path ahead, and her breath was even. Where once she would have looked for signs of rescue, now she looked for moments, for the breath between steps, the shifting patterns in the sand, the birds flying overhead. Everything was speaking in its own way, and inside her, a voice remained, not audible, not loud, but deeply embedded. I am with you. She began to speak aloud to the desert, not as a madwoman, but as a companion on the road. I used to think miracles were loud, she said as she climbed a low hill. Flashing lights, thunder, a shout from the heavens. But now, I think they're quiet, like water in the sand, like peace after pain. She paused, placing a hand on her chest. Like you, the breeze lifted slightly as if responding. As the day wore on, she stopped in the shade of a rocky outcrop and drank just enough water to soothe her lips. She had more now than just water in her bowl. She had understanding. She sat still for a long time, her hands folded, eyes closed. Images danced through her memory. Her mother's laughter, her father's silent strength, her brother's mischief. The pain was still sharp, but it no longer crushed her. It shaped her, and with that shaping came clarity. She rose again and walked, not to escape, not to survive, but to carry something forward. She began to encounter signs of other life. Faint tracks in the sand, the whisper of distant movement. At one point, she spotted smoke curling upward far away, faint as thread against the sky. It could be a settlement. It could be a trap, but she didn't hesitate. As night approached, she reached the edge of a shallow ridge and looked down. In the distance was a small grouping of tents, a nomadic camp. Perhaps shapes moved near small fires, and the scent of food wafted faintly toward her. Her stomach turned painfully. She hadn't eaten in days, but she didn't descend right away. She looked at the bowl tied to her side. It was still half full. She realized in that moment she could give it away. That thought stunned her, not just because of the sacrifice, but because it came so easily. After all she had suffered, after all she had lost, she could still give, and that meant she hadn't lost herself. She walked down the ridge, slow and steady. The people in the camp turned toward her, surprised, cautious. A stranger in the night. One of them, an older woman, stepped forward, her face lined with desert winds and years of endurance. She studied Olivia silently. Olivia untied the bowl and extended it. For you, she said softly. The woman blinked in disbelief, then accepted it with reverence. She called someone behind her, a child, barefoot, and blinking up at Olivia with wide eyes. The child drank, then smiled. Something cracked inside Olivia, not from pain, but from release. That night, they invited her to sit by their fire. They didn't ask many questions. They didn't need to. The desert had a way of knowing what a person had endured without a word being spoken. She slept among them, not in loneliness, but in the presence of something new, community. She dreamed for the first time in weeks, not of her family, not of loss, but of walking beside Jesus in the desert. They said nothing. They just walked, two figures in the vastness, sharing the silence. In the dream, he turned to her and smiled, and she smiled back. Morning light spilled gently over the camp, casting long shadows in the tent and dancing across Olivia's face as she opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the sounds reached her, low voices, the clinking of metal bowls, the soft laughter of a child, and her body relaxed. She was safe. She was not alone. She sat up slowly, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, her limbs stiff from rest but not pain. The smell of cooking flatbread reached her, mixing with the earthy scent of sand and wool. Around the fire, the people moved like water, flowing, patient, rhythmic. One of the women, the same who had accepted the bowl of water, smiled at her and offered her food. Olivia accepted it with a soft thank you, bowing her head. The bread was coarse and dry, but it filled her stomach and warmed her chest. She hadn't realized how much she missed the simplicity of sharing a meal. As she ate, she watched the camp with quiet reverence. They were survivors, too, not because they had seen miracles or heard divine voices, but because they endured every day through wind and sun and scarcity. They chose to keep going. Just like her, And yet, something within her was still stirring. She hadn't stopped thinking about what Jesus had said to her. They are not lost. They are with me, and I am with you. Those words echoed louder now, not as comfort, but as calling. There was still something she was meant to do, some place she was meant to be. When the sun rose high enough to heat the sands, Olivia thanked her hosts and told them she had to go. They didn't question her. They simply offered her a piece of cloth to wrap her feet and a pouch with a little bread. No water. Not because they didn't want to give it, but because they knew she no longer needed it the same way. As she left the camp behind, the wind lifted her hair, and her steps felt light despite the distance ahead. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she was going for a reason. She walked for hours, then days, crossing dunes, climbing stony ridges, and tracing dry riverbeds that seemed to whisper stories of life once lived. At times, she would pause and close her eyes, breathing in deeply, allowing the stillness to speak. And always, somewhere just behind her shoulder, she felt it, that presence. Not seen, not heard, but unmistakable. It was like walking with a friend who never left your side. She spoke to him often now, not always aloud, but in the silence of her thoughts. "You knew I wouldn't make it in time," she would say, "but you sent me anyway." Sometimes the wind would shift gently in response, as if to say, yes, because the journey was never about time. It was about trust. One afternoon, Olivia stumbled upon an abandoned well. The stone ring around it was cracked and overgrown, the pulley rusted, the rope frayed. She knelt beside it and peered into the darkness. Dry. She sat back and laughed softly. "Of course," she said. "Even now you remind me, not every well gives water, but every step has meaning." She placed her hand over the stone and closed her eyes. The moment held her, suspended between memory and faith. In her mind, she saw the face of her mother again, soft, worn, full of love. She saw her father's calloused hands, always fixing, always working. She saw her brother's small fingers gripping hers during cold desert nights. And she saw herself, not as she had been, but as she was now. Not just a girl, a witness, a vessel. She didn't need to carry their bodies. She carried their legacy, their courage, their endurance, their dreams. All of it lived on in her. She would not let their lives fade into silence. She would speak. She would walk. She would bring water, not just the kind you drink, but the kind that heals. As the sun began to dip behind a distant ridge, Olivia stood once more and continued her journey. Her pace was steady, her gaze forward, and then, just as twilight painted the sky in purple and indigo, she saw a flicker of light in the distance. Not firelight, not lightning, something else. A glow, soft, gentle, familiar. She stopped. The wind was still, and then he appeared again, not walking this time, standing, waiting. Olivia's breath caught. Jesus stood on the crest of a dune, his figure illuminated not by the sun, but by something deeper, something eternal. She stepped forward, barefoot, heart wide open. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She understood now. Everything. Why she had suffered. Why she had survived. Why she had been chosen. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they did not burn. They fell freely, like rain, like blessing. He extended a hand, and she walked to him, not for comfort, but for strength. His hand was warm, not hot like the sun, not cold like the wind at night, but steady like the heartbeat of something eternal. Olivia reached for it without hesitation, her fingers wrapping around his palm like roots finally touching water. She didn't ask where they were going. She just walked with him. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was alive, vibrating with everything she had ever questioned, everything she had ever hoped. They climbed the dune together, and when they reached the top, the desert below stretched wide and golden beneath the fading twilight. Jesus stopped and looked out across the horizon. Olivia stood beside him, her breath catching at the sight. It was the same desert, and yet it felt entirely new. "I never imagined I would survive," she said quietly, her voice like sand brushing stone. "I didn't think I had anything left." He turned to her. You didn't, but you allowed yourself to be filled again. She lowered her gaze, blinking, but I'm still broken. I still miss them. You always will, he said. Love leaves marks, not wounds. Marks, proof that it existed. Olivia felt her shoulders loosen, as if a long-held burden was melting away in the wind. They were my whole world, she whispered. And now, Jesus said gently, you carry that world with you. They stood there together, watching the light fade until stars blinked into view. First one, then many, then hundreds. She had always looked at the night sky as something distant, untouchable. But tonight, it felt like a reflection of everything inside her, vast, unknowable, and full of light she hadn't seen before. He spoke again. You asked why I let you walk alone. She nodded slowly, so many times. I never left you, he said. Not when you cried, not when you screamed, not when you fell. But I didn't hear you. He smiled softly. I was in your breath, in the strength you didn't know you had, in the moments you chose to rise again. Tears filled her eyes. I thought I failed, she admitted. Jesus stepped closer. You never failed. You fulfilled. The words fell into her like seeds into soil. She closed her eyes and breathed. In, out, peace. He turned toward her again. You're not just a girl from the desert, Olivia. You are someone who walked through the wilderness and returned with water. You are someone who chose hope when it was easier to break. But there's nothing left for me to return to, she said. He looked out across the stars, then create something new. She frowned. Alone? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed out into the darkness. Far off, distant and small, there was a faint glow, a campfire, another, and another. A line of light stretched across the sand, like a constellation scattered across the earth. She stared, her heart pounding. Others? She asked. He nodded. There are always others. Olivia stepped forward, squinting toward the lights. They looked so far, so unreachable. But how will I get to them? She asked. I don't know the way. He reached into his robe and pulled out something small, a piece of cloth, soft and worn. When he unfolded it, Olivia saw a map drawn in soft lines and ancient ink. But the map didn't show mountains or roads or borders. It showed paths of light, like veins pulsing across the land. It's not a map of the land, she whispered. No, he said. It's a map of calling, a map of souls. She looked up at him. Mine. Yours, he confirmed. And those you were meant to touch. Her hands trembled as she took the cloth. It shimmered faintly under the starlight, warm against her skin. Will I ever see you again? She asked. Jesus smiled, not with sadness, but with the certainty of someone who knew the answer even if she didn't yet. I never left, he said again, and I never will. She looked into his eyes one last time, deep wells that held every question and every answer. And then he was gone, not in a flash of light, not in a gust of wind. He simply faded, like the final note of a song that would never be forgotten. Olivia stood on the dune alone, the cloth in her hand, the stars above, and the map of souls burning gently against her chest. She turned back to the horizon. The fires waited, and so did the people. She had no sword, no crown, no miracle to boast of, only water, only truth, only faith. And that was enough. She stepped forward, into the dark, into her purpose. The fires in the distance flickered like silent beacons, whispering promises to the night sky. Olivia tightened the cloth map against her chest, its warmth like a heartbeat she could feel beneath her ribs. She didn't need to look at it to know where she was going. The path was no longer outside her. It had become something internal. The desert didn't fight her anymore. It welcomed her. Each grain of sand beneath her feet now felt familiar, not soft, not forgiving, but honest. Like everything in her life up to now, the wind that once howled in her ears now hummed gently, as if singing to her. Even the stars, scattered above her like scattered prayers, seemed to pulse in rhythm with her breath. She was not the same girl who left home searching for water. She was a vessel, and her journey was no longer a desperate search. It was a sacred delivery. She walked for 2 days without stopping, save for a few moments of rest beneath jagged stones or small hills where the desert curved into shelter. She drank little, ate only when necessary, and spent most of her time listening to the wind, to her heartbeat, to the memory of his voice. On the 3rd morning, as the sky began to blush with dawn, Olivia reached the first camp. It was quiet, small, nestled between 2 sand ridges, the tent stitched together from pieces of whatever their owners could find. She saw movement, a mother stirring a pot, a boy collecting dried roots, an old man coughing violently by a fire that barely clung to its embers. They didn't notice her at first, but she didn't step in loudly. She simply waited, hands open, the cloth still pressed against her chest. When they finally saw her, they paused, startled, wary. She raised a hand in peace. "I come with water," she said softly. At first, there was no response. Then the old man rose shakily, eyes narrowed. "There's no water here," he rasped. "I know," Olivia said. "That's why I came." From her side, she unwrapped the bowl, the same one she had carried from her home, now polished smooth by time and wind. She untied the pouch she had filled days before and poured it slowly into the bowl. Clear, clean, unexplainable. They stared. One child stepped forward. Another followed. Soon, the entire camp stood in a loose circle around her. She offered the bowl first to the old man. He took it with trembling hands, drank, his eyes welled with tears, not from thirst, but from disbelief. "You found it?" he asked. Olivia shook her head. "No, it found me." He looked at her, trying to understand. "I thought I came to find water," she continued, "but I was really being filled, so I could bring it here." The old man pressed the bowl to his chest, then passed it on. One by one they drank, and when they were done, no one spoke. They simply looked at her like she had come from some place they couldn't name. She spent the night with them, told them stories of her journey, of the emptiness, of the pain, of the voice that spoke when all else was silent. Some wept, some sat in stillness, but all listened. Before dawn, she left, not because she was unwelcome, but because her feet were already pulled forward by the next fire, the next soul. In the days that followed, Olivia visited more camps, some hidden behind wind-sculpted cliffs, others on the edge of dry lake beds. In each, she arrived silent, with only her story in the water. The cloth map glowed slightly when she approached the right places. Its pulse like a whisper from the divine. Not all camps needed water, but all needed something. Sometimes it was only a word. Sometimes just presence. Sometimes the memory of someone who had made it through. And she gave, not from abundance, but from transformation. She began to feel the change in herself too, in her posture, in her voice. The sadness was still there, woven into her every breath. But it no longer ruled her. It guided her, like the stars guided the lost. One night, as she sat beneath a tall stone arched deep in the desert, a young girl came to her. She had heard of Olivia from travelers who spoke of the girl with water that never ran dry. "My mother is sick," the child said. Olivia looked down. "Where?" The girl pointed toward the hills. Olivia stood immediately. When they arrived, the girl's mother lay beneath a crude shelter, her skin pale and burning. She had the look of someone who had given too much and received too little. Olivia knelt beside her. She didn't offer the water immediately. She took her hand first and whispered, "You're not alone." The woman's breathing slowed. Then, gently, Olivia raised the bowl and held it to her lips. The water shimmered, not just with light, but with something holy. The woman drank, and for the first time in days, she slept peacefully. The girl cried softly and hugged Olivia tightly. "You came," she said. Olivia smiled. "I always will." She didn't know how she knew that, but she did. She would keep walking, keep showing up, not as a savior, but as someone who had survived, and because she survived, others could too. She had seen many fires since the day she left her home behind. She had touched the hands of strangers, whispered prayers into cracked lips, and poured water into empty bowls, both literal and spiritual. She had walked until the soles of her feet bled and healed again, until her name was no longer just Olivia, but the girl who came when hope had dried up. But now, she stood before a place she had not seen in what felt like an eternity. Her home. The house had not changed. The crooked roof still leaned under the weight of old branches. The walls, made of dried clay and held together with love and desperation, still stood defiant against the wind. Even the tiny window, half covered in woven cloth, was exactly as she remembered. But the silence, it was different, heavier. She stepped forward, every footfall stirring ghosts of her past. Each step carried 1,000 memories. Her brother's laughter, her mother's hands braiding her hair, her father humming as he fixed a door that never quite shut properly. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, it was dim, dust curling in the air like forgotten breath. She looked around. The bowls still rested on the shelves. A single scar hung on the wall. Their mat lay in the center, flattened from use but untouched since she had last seen it. And there, on the mat, were 3 shapes. Still, lifeless. Tears didn't come immediately. Olivia stepped inside, slow and reverent, like she was walking into a temple. She knelt beside them, her hands trembling as she reached for her mother's hand. Cold, her brother's face, small, frozen in the softness of sleep. Her father's arm, curled around them both, as if even in death he had tried to shield them. She touched their faces one by one, her fingertips brushing their skin like feathers. And then, finally, she wept, not the wild, panic sobs of before, but deep, aching sobs that came from somewhere beneath her bones. "I tried," she whispered. "I really tried." Her cries echoed off the walls, filling the house that had once been filled with life. She cried until she couldn't breathe, until the desert outside stilled to listen. And then something changed. She felt it before she heard it. A warmth behind her, a presence. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. "Why?" she asked. His voice was close, a whisper of breath. "Because some stories begin with loss." She closed her eyes. "They didn't deserve this," she said, voice breaking. "No one does," Jesus replied. "But every soul has its journey. Theirs led them here. Yours led you further." "But I don't want to be strong anymore," she said. "I want them." "You always will," he said gently. "And they're not gone. They are part of you. They live in every drop of water you've given, in every child you've comforted, in every step you take." She turned to him slowly, her face streaked with tears. He looked the same as before, still glowing softly, eyes deep as forever. "I thought you abandoned me," she said. "I was there in the silence," he replied. "I was there in the hunger, in the footsteps, in the tears. I was there in your strength, the kind you didn't know you had." She swallowed hard. "So now what?" "You choose," he said. "You can stay here, mourn, remember, or you can rise and walk." She looked back at the bodies one last time, then rose to her feet. She kissed her mother's forehead, placed her brother's small hand over his chest, and laid her father's arm gently at his side. Then she stood. The sun was beginning to rise outside. She turned toward the light. "I'll never forget them," she said. "You're not meant to," he answered. "You're meant to carry them with you, not as sorrow, but as strength." She took a deep breath and stepped outside. The desert greeted her again, wide, golden, alive. But this time, she did not feel like a girl swallowed by it. She felt like someone the desert had carved, shaped and tested, and ultimately chosen. As she walked away from her home, she did not look back. She didn't need to. She had already brought her family with her. In her heart, in her steps, in every miracle she would be part of from now on. And somewhere far off, unseen by any eye, a path lit up in sand. A path meant for her.